Hey everybody, welcome to a really special episode of the Growing with Fishes podcast, episode 127 this week with Kevin Jodrey. Thanks a lot for joining us, Kevin.
Thank you so much for having me on your show.
Episode of the Growing with Fishes podcast. Got the loop in the back there, so I always have the thing open so I can see chat, and sometimes I forget to mute it. And then we also have Mr. Green Jeans. Thanks for joining us.
Hey everybody, it's an honor to be here. Great to be here with Kevin. Thanks a lot.
Yeah.
All right. So, Kevin, why don't you tell us a little bit about what you do, and you've quite the experience in cannabis. I don't think I've ever met anyone that understands, especially the marketing end of deciding what type of strain or cultivars to use in a given area, and all and really breaks it down in a really intelligent way. And I mean, I've just learned so much from just your talks online, along with hearing you talk and then getting to speak with you and getting to know you a little bit at the Regenerative Organic Cannabis Cultivation Conference. It's really been, really wonderful, and I really can't thank you enough for all you've done for the community.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure to meet you and the crew too. It was just unexpected to be asked to be part of that event, and I just had the best time, and the connection with the people's been phenomenal. My cannabis experiences go back a long time. I mean, I'm 52. I'll be 53 this summer. I got into cannabis when I was 12. So for 40 years, I've been exposed to cannabis. And throughout the course of that time, it was the love of the cannabis plant that just drove me forward. And as we go forward through all these decades, I end up coming out here right now in time with, I got my farm with the state and a county license. So now we're working on the annual, which would be killer. Then I can take that and turn that into a regenerative site. I have a functional storefront that we're happy that's actually working and it's doing well. We have a nursery that's designed to be fed through a tissue culture facility. Have a mixed light greenhouse operation running at that same location. And then at the operational site, we have a large extraction facility. And at my old nursery location, we have a terpene stripping facility, which is kind of trick, where really you're taking steam cylinders and you're pulling the terps off of desirable cannabis plants so that you can take that cannabis-derived terpenes and then add it to your distillate so that you're able to use cannabis on the cartridge. So what you have is a full cannabis cartridge, but it allows you to tailor the cartridges to really fit the direction you want to go. And all of them combined is pretty interesting to be involved in. I'm fundamentally, I'm a cultivator, but I realized a long time ago that if I didn't grab and move in the new world, that I would be very vulnerable. And I knew that farmers historically have the worst position, that in the agricultural world, the person that does the production has the most vulnerability. And the problem is that's my real love is actually growing cannabis. And so I tried to build other models around me that would give me some chance to survive if I wasn't able to get the farm permitted. And I was lucky where I was able to get a couple of these things built and operational. And so it gives me a pretty interesting perspective because I'm somebody that's career where I came up in, what we call the old unregulated markets. Then we went through the 215 days. Then now we're in the Prop 64. And I've had a storefront operational experience and ownership for about 11 years. I created the first vertical nursery model in basically the United States, where you could go into a facility, you could see the cannabis grow, you could choose the flower to smoke, and then you could go buy that exact plant. And the stuff that we were putting in to the market was stuff that was really in demand. So I was able to source the markets from all my years of what I did, which was basically hustling, and get material that I knew was going to be current and put it right into the hands of the cultivators so that they'd have an opportunity to be able to move forward. And that model really worked for people, and it allowed them to stay current with the markets. And because I had such a long history prior, what I started really understanding was that I had studied the markets in a different way. I had looked at the whole US as a giant marketplace, and I started differentiating what different regions wanted based off of their needs. So it allowed me to start to see patterns and rhythms. And at that time, this was, still before the Prop 64 era. So people were still, doing the thing. And what it did is it let me find varietals that were in demand in regions where you were actually delivering the finished product to. So this way, the people who got the product from us would be able to succeed. And that work all those years doing that just really helps me out understand California, because I use that same strategy to understand where we should put plants on the table and for where you should sell them.
So you actually you have a really great way of kind of telling or breaking down the different types of cannabis kind of into 4 different categories. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? I thought that was really, really interesting.
Yeah. What we found, over the years is that when you're looking at cannabis as a massive picture, that really it's so many different little edges that it's kind of hard to quantify what you're really looking at. And so I broke it into 4 major divisions, and it was fuel and earth, fruit, and floral. And those are just descriptions that make it easy for people so that you're not having to hit them with too much scientific information or knowledge, because most people didn't go that deep into what cannabis is, and they shouldn't have to make a good decision. You don't have to understand all the complexes in a steak in order to eat one, but you just have to understand, is it a good cut of meat, and where does it source from? So what I did with those categories is I created it for a competition that I own. So I created a light depth competition, the first light depth competition in the state, actually first one in the US. And in order for me to have the lab analysis shrink down the total number of entries to make it judgeable by a group in a single day, I wanted to use total terps, total potency to make that happen. But I know that that's a very inaccurate indicator of experience, meaning that powerful numbers don't actually indicate the quality of the experience for the user. So I realized that if I took this division on how I saw cannabis and I broke it up like that, and I had people enter in those respective divisions, it would allow me to get the highest of each division competing against each other. So it let me have, earth divisions, which are like a Bubba coming in around 13, 14, competing against a 32 OG. And it worked really well for the cultivators. They all agreed that it was a good system. Everyone understood it. And it allowed us to have a competition that let us use the laboratories to help us shrink the populations down, but not make it just a numbers cup. And I got challenged by a group of scientists from UCLA. And they asked me what my hypothesis was. And I said, really, it's just a lifetime of being in the industry. And so they said, well, we're going to challenge this and see, is it valid? And it ended up being valid. And what it did was it started to create an ability for the scientists to start to take cannabis and look at it from a different perspective on how we understand what we would call sativa and indica. And when you start to use those words, typically we're using them now for morphological differences in terms of shape and characteristics. But the effect is hard to quantify. But what we found is that based off of terpene relationships, you could take these varietals and lay them out on a graph, and it came out unbelievably accurate. And so the scientists from UCLA were able to take that and start using it as a way to show what varietals and how they laid out. And when the scientists from UCLA tied in with another group of scientists who do EKG work, the EKG scientists had a cluster of varietals. And when they tested the EKG on the user, there was almost no difference. And so they said all cannabis is the same. But when they started to apply the information that we had come up with, they started to find that if you follow the gradient from what we believe to be, ethereal, which we would have considered classically sativa, to something sedative that we would have considered classically indica, the brain waves move clearly throughout each of these people. And so you start having this incredible way to quantify what the end user is going to experience in a far more accurate manner. And so this way, you start to enable the people who sell cannabis at the stores to be able to recommend things that are accurate. And you start to allow the farmers, the growers, the nursery operators to not have too many redundant choices that actually achieve the same result to the user. It lets you stratify your library and your choices. So this way you have the best chance of catching the markets, and you don't have too many things weighed in one area. And if you do your market analysis, you're going to find that those markets pulse in terms of demand, and they also pulse in terms of regional demand. And so depending on where you're moving your flowers, you're able to take a look and find where should you concentrate the majority of your production. And you know that you can fill the fuel. If the fuel is hot, you go into the fuel groups. If it's floral, you go into the floral. And an example of floral would be something like a super haze, and an earth would be a bubba, and a fuel would be an OG, and a fruit would be like a tangy. And so if your market is concentrate derived, where people want to go into concentrates and they want a high monoterpene direction, you know that you should go into the fruits and work with those varietals. If you have a heavy fuel base, you go into the fuels. If you have people that are more relaxed and want to chill, which is really the older group, you go into the earths. And if you're in the Silicon Valley, any tech area, that's where the florals really take off. So it allows somebody to be able to always understand that it's not the name of the variety, but it's the desired effect that the user is looking for. And if you're able to understand that, then you can always find something in those clusters that works incredibly well and has a good quality, both as cultivar for you and as a chemovar for the end user. So it allows you to be much more targeted for what you're doing with an accuracy. And when science backs it up, it's a lot easier for us as cannabis individuals to be able to have some validity with the mainstream, because for some reason, no one wants to listen to us, even though we've been doing this for about 40 years. So that's the breakdown.
Can you explain to some people a little bit what a chemovar is? Because I know a lot of our, not all of our listeners know what that is.
Yeah, the cultivars and chemovars are really simple. Cultivar is basically the plant. So we would call like the plant like the chassis. And the chemovar is the chemical constituents that make it up. So that's your terpenes, your cannabinoids, and all the other active compounds that are within cannabis. And those two things combined create the total package. And as a grower, we're always seeking out the cultivar, things that are going to work for us in our situation: mold resistance, wind resistance, flowering time, ability to create a product that can hold up under packaging. And then the chemovar is the experience. Does it suit the end user? And when you put the two together, you have success. And a lot of times there's differentiation, where growers in the past used to always run after the cultivar, things that just grew well. And the market always wanted the chemovar, and they usually wanted stuff that didn't grow at all. So it made it brutal for the grower. And you're trying to find this intersection where the cultivar and the chemovar touch, so that you're getting the quality for the user, but you're not beating the grower up.
That's interesting. I had a quick question, because you mentioned that. I'm just curious, because before we get too far past this, why is it that the techies like the floral?
The techies like the floral. You know what's funny is I asked that same question. So I do my research, right? I'm
you
like,
think they're like the up high, but yeah.
For real. I go into the tech areas and I ask, and I go, why are these ethereal hazes but with some bottom end there? And it's because so many of them are running wild on coding. So they have to keep creativity while they're banging keyboard for 8 hours a day. But the thing is, because they're all hunched over a keyboard, they have body pain. And so
I know what me too.
So they don't need something that's just a lift. They need something that gives them some kind of pain relief, because their back hurts and their shoulders hurt and their fingers hurt.
Yeah.
Exactly. And so the florals work beautifully. And if you take a look, the best example of that is Blue Dream. And someone says, well, Blue Dream isn't an applicable plant anymore, but it's the #1 seller in basically Frisco and Seattle, any tech market. And so they have choices in money. Why are they buying that? And it's because it gives them what they need. It gives them a clear state of mind with some creativity, but enough body effect that they don't have to, really think about that they're sitting in a horrible chair looking at a keyboard, banging fingers for 10 hours.
No, okay, thank you, because I'm legally blind, so I really hunch over my keyboard, a lot and stuff. And I'm always really up, over. And I mean, my upper back between my shoulder blades and my kidneys area and my neck take a toll when I've been working for hours. It's killing me. Okay, thank you. Yeah, that's great. By the way, Kevin, I'm Larry. Nice to meet you.
Hey, Larry.
Oh, I'm Roger on the show. That's what Mama calls me. Sorry.
All right, no worries. Larry's your alias.
Larry's a short for Lawrence, which is my middle name, because my dad, I'm Roger Jr. I'm Roger Jr.
Gotcha.
But in business, I'm Roger, and I'm sorry. Yeah, I play music, and that's nothing to do with the show. But everybody knows me from the old days as Larry, like Mama called me. So
nice.
Roger. I'm sorry.
So you do a lot of work with testing and stuff. You actually just were at a conference. You want to talk a little bit about that? Because that was really cool. You were talking about in SoCal.
Yeah, the conference was the Emerald Conference, and I got invited down. the scientific group that did all their research based off of my assumption that cannabis breaks up into the 4 categories, they invited me in because they were unleashing a business that they're going to base off of my work. And someone laughed and said, "Don't you wish you had built a business?" And I did. But the truth is, a lot of times with scientific stuff, you can come up with the ideas, but you don't have all the other tools to put it into play. But the thing is, what it does, the end result is what we want. We want the user, the customer, the person who buys the product to be able to have a better level of understanding. And so I'm totally cool with people taking the work I do and benefiting from it, because ultimately it serves us in a way that's positive. But what was killer about it was a phenomenal tech conference, but they had a scientist that spoke before Dr. Abrams, and it was all about DNA mapping your endocannabinoid system, to where now they're starting to be able to do like the 23andMe's, but they're mapping your body and they're mapping your endocannabinoid system so they can actually figure out where you should go with your varietal choices. Meaning, should it be low CBD, high THC, low CBD, or some respective ratio? And that kind of stuff, even though I'm, a little nervous about sending my genome in to get mapped by a company, the fact that we're able to start really taking a look at how the body actually assimilates cannabis, and how do you make it easy for people who are new to cannabis to understand, and then how do you find the varietals that they need. And then with the other scientists that came on, like I said, had done the EKG work, and they showed all the data that they had done prior to meeting Dr. Abrams, and it showed clusters that had no differentiation, and it was because they were all the same varietals, really. Even though different names, they came out the same as in the chemotype. But when we really looked at it from a little bit better perspective, you could see the brainwaves clearly move. And so, all of a sudden I see this knowledge of what the end user needs to know about how to use cannabis correctly for themselves without a lifetime of experimentation, which is where most of us that are, smoking weed now, I mean, we spend our whole lives puffing. And so you can't expect anybody without all those years to really have this nuanced understanding. And what happens is, if they go the wrong route, you scare them. And then it's not that you lose a customer, but a lot of times these people would benefit tremendously from cannabis usage. Their endocannabinoid system needs to be stimulated, and they would do better if they had the ability. And because they go the wrong route, it either gives them an effect that's undesirable or something that scares them to death, doesn't work. So when you can start to see how the science is starting to show us these pictures, and then we can take that information and bring it down to the level needed so that the user isn't having to go through all this research, but they can say, hey, these things line up. And now there's multiple scientists that are coming out with these same theories based off of what we had come up with years ago, that cannabis breaks up into 4 major groups. And they're also saying the same thing in their own studies out of Switzerland, out of Israel. So you start to see science substantiating a lot of the thoughts that so many of us have had for all these years. The part that was cool with the science too is you had all these companies coming in that had, state-of-the-art testing equipment. And some of them were incredible, where you could start to do all your laboratory swipes. So you could go take a set of swabs, you could swab your greenhouse, you could swab any of the materials in the facility and find out, do you have any pathogenic situations occurring? You're starting to get the price of the testing down, and you're starting to get the convenience of the testing up. And because of that, it just makes it so much better for us as cultivators, individuals in cannabis, to be able to find out, are we going to have a problem, versus we produce a product, then we test it, then we find we have a problem, and now we can't get the product back. Products, once it's been tested and they've determined that there's an issue, that's a destroyed product. So I was digging the conference in that you're starting to see the legitimacy of cannabis being proven. And it's not anecdotal anymore. And we need the proof so that we can get the dissension out. The education that was given to the American public globally, really, the global public, through the Reefer Madness wars, it destroyed so many people in the way that most people don't realize, and that they could have been tremendously helped by cannabis through many of their ailments. And because they were stigmatized, they never went and tried to use cannabis therapy as a route out of cancer,
Right.
or out of radiation chemotherapy situations. And being in medical for so long, I just saw it in person. So to me, I'm overjoyed that You're starting to get science to substantiate what we've done all these years. And it lets us understand that, hey, we actually did see something from observation. And so all of a sudden, all of us that were in cannabis become a lot more legitimate, because at first we were always trying to be minimized by the new individuals coming in. But lo and behold, they're starting to substantiate what we've said. And it allows us to be the translators to the public for this information. So I dig Science Conference because you get to see the future, but we're really the translators. We're the people that help the mainstream understand, so that they don't have to spend their whole lives trying to understand what to do. We can say, look, this is what we know. Here's the proof. Here's some direction. And now we can start to have really acceptance.
Well,
you do a lot with genetic certification. I know you get do a work with Phylos. I know there's just some confusion around Phylos. Do you want to tell a little bit about how that's worked out for you? I know you got a lot of benefits from their testing and stuff like that.
Can I ask something before we move on, so that we can stay? Because I'd like to ask a question about the last topic.
Yeah, sure.
If you don't mind, Steve. Two things was that you were saying. I think part of the comment I wanted to make a comment and ask a question to you real quick. I think mostly, like, my parents and grandparents were stigmatized by the fact that it was illegal. It became prohibited. So that's why they wouldn't go to that extra length to try it, even though. But here's my other statement: it was in 30% of our medicine in 1930. So the pharmacy. So why isn't that being used? So that's what's your opinion on why is that not being used as a proof that it had medical properties and was and then let's take a look at all the medicines it was in 1930.
Well, the problem with that is that I mean, in my own belief is that at that time, they were putting cocaine and opiates in your drinks at the same time.
Coca-Cola.
So the problem is that when you start lumping cannabis with opiates and coke, it again takes cannabis out of its legitimacy. And even though those things were very effective, opiates were phenomenal for painkillers historically. And if you didn't if you didn't abuse it, it was a good tool. And I think that coca, same thing, used for millennia to handle high altitude stress. To where if you were living in the mountains of Colombia and you were having to be a porter carrying a bag of rock on your head, chewing coca leaf with the bite of lime, made it a lot more tolerable. But the thing is, we want to separate cannabis from these other drugs because those other drugs don't seem to have the broad-based applicability that cannabis does. And you end up trying to say, well, cannabis is only good for one thing, but really endocannabinoid stimulation seems to be good for most everything.
So you were saying that it was because it was lumped in with the opiates back in the 30s or 20s and 30s and all that created the like why it's hard to use that as a benchmark to where it's been proven it was medical, even though we know it's been there for 1,000 years, but in the United States it was banned after being in like 30% of our pharmaceutical medicines.
Completely. And all the animals, at that time, most of the animals were being fed, hemp for forage. So you had you had an incredible amount of endocannabinoid stimulation occurring from that. So
thank you.
No worries. So with Phylos, I had tried to map cannabis myself using. I hired some scientists. I went to the local university. I picked up some non-tenured professors on a payroll. And I tried to start mapping. This was probably like maybe 7 years ago, about 7, 8 years ago. And so I tried to map cannabis using terp profiles because there was no genomic mapping. And what I wanted to do was I wanted to start to be able to differentiate all the different OGs because we had so many of them. And I wanted to be able to say, I know for a fact this one and this one are not related. Or they're related, but they're not the same. And what we found was with the scientists that I had hired that it was impossible to use terp profiles because they're so variable. So we find that you can't use this. And remember, at this time, nobody was really talking about this at our level. But I was working with so many plants in the nursery operation that I needed to be able to help people understand what was what and how do we quantify it. And if we lose it, how do we reprove that it is what it is to make it easy? And then Phylos comes out, they map the genome. All of a sudden now we start having some markers. And it gives us a little better picture. And I meet the group of them, and they were solid guys. I didn't have any trepidation, and I'm not necessarily trusting. My career has been based off of a lack of trust, and that's why I got so far in the game, was because I have to have a sense of feel from you. And what I found was that their desire was pretty simple. They wanted to do sex testing, and they wanted to map the genome so that down the road they could do advanced breeding projects, and they needed to have the data. And if we had the ability to enter varietals into their system, it let us start being able to take a look at where we were. And I started using it for breeding projects, so I could look at the levels of heterozygosity, homozygosity. I could take a look to see if we were too bottlenecked in a genetic group. And I started to find that it was a really neat way to market your genetics for the mainstream, because the mainstream is caught up in digital visual. And so the galaxy was this beautiful picture, and it allowed people to see relationships and separations. And so I didn't have any qualms with what I was doing with the genes, because fundamentally everything that you're working with, 99% of it you got from someone else. And so for me, I wanted to have all this material available as information for the public to use. And I wanted to have some source of inception, so that if people came and tried to patent it later, at least what you had is some proof that it was in the open system before the patent. And it gave a challenge. And I was afraid that the people who were growers were going to lose the opportunity to grow things that work well on their farms, that had made success for them. And so I said, if we can put these things in, even though it's not necessarily the full protection, at least it starts to say that this plant was in use before your patent and your definition that you're the one who built it came out. And it's been a really good relationship. I've used them for a tremendous amount of marking work, and I can use them to help me understand advanced genetics, because they have a team of fantastic PhD level breeders. So it lets people like us that are more application work with people who are more scientific, and get our skill level up, and start to really be able to figure out what we're doing in cannabis as a science, and not try to extrapolate data from other type of breeding situations and put them on cannabis, because cannabis is so complex with so many traits that it makes it hard. So I really do. I've had a good relationship with them, and the work that they've done has been solid, and I still think they're good people. And sometimes there's terror and fear that people are going to steal your material and they're going to do something, but they've been honest about it the whole time. They never once claimed that they weren't going to use this material down the road for information. They can't recreate your plant from code as easy as people think it is. It's not so simple to take the code, transfer it, and blast it onto a cucumber, and all of a sudden they got your plant. And they can't steal your material from a dead stick, because that's what you're giving them. But for us, it allowed people to be able to start differentiating genes, getting the public to be able to say, hey, I really like that gene. And what I wanted was the public to be able to have a directory where if they went into a store and they found something like Louis XIII and they said, man, that was the best OG I ever smoked, how do I find more of it? They could go onto the Galaxy and pop up the Louis XIII cluster. And on that cluster, they'd find other farms that had grown it other than you. And then they could look to see who carried those farms' products. So the customer was able to get what they wanted. And then the growers were able to make sure that they were able to use that combined branding. So on things that have a value and it's a hot cut, you can prove it on Phylos that you got that hot cut. The public will pick it up. Dispensaries will pick it up. And it just allows you that system. And now there's a couple other companies that have come out. Medicinal Genomics is a well-known one. Kevin McKiernan, he was involved in mapping the human genome. So there's multiple companies coming out. But Phylos was the first. And they're the ones I still stick with because, like I said, I love their staff. And they just got some really nice, solid plant breeders that when you hang out with them, they inspire confidence and trust in you. You don't feel like they're trying to screw you. And that's a big one with me, man. Like I said, I'm not necessarily trusting. I try to be kind, but trust I give you slowly.
Yeah, I was wondering why you'd want scientific brainiacs to be the breeders and why they'd be better, but that was a good explanation. Yeah, that's why.
Very helpful, man, because there's so many traits in cannabis. It's unbelievable. And there are some incredible cannabis breeders who, excuse me, that have a background in genetics, or they're self-educated and they've just done a tremendous amount of breeding, but they're rare. And the more information that we can have so that we're able to provide that as a catalyst to the public. Our job as old school growers is to be able to really understand how to translate the information so that you're not caught up in these trendy fads. You're able to actually educate a consumer and say, hey, listen, these are some of the things that you should be aware of so you can make intelligent choices. Because if we can get the mainstream to accept cannabis, we can get them to get quality of experience, then we get to continue being in cannabis. But if you steer them the wrong way and all of a sudden the information is not accurate, people are having bad experiences, it could very well be taken away. And if you took cannabis away from me, I spent my whole life here. It'd be like you took away oxygen. So I try to really see it from a service point of view in a way that maybe I go beyond the norm on it. But what I want to see is I want to see an acceptance of cannabis as a legitimate substance. And I want the mainstream to see us historical cultivators as legitimate individuals so that no one has to feel diminished. I think cannabis is ultra inclusive. All colors, all sizes, all shapes, all sexualities, all religions, everybody fits under the cannabis sun. And we're close. If we can keep moving this forward, man, we'll end up having a really beautiful future where we're older and we'll be able to have a cannabis society in a way that we never did during our lifetime.
You've actually done a lot of work to bring the community together, especially in Humboldt, and attitudes are changing a lot, especially this year. Do you want to talk a little bit about that? Because you've done a lot more than most people to try and make that happen.
Well, I realized a long time ago that what you need to be successful in business is the customer has to recognize you. And the thing is, with a lot of us in cannabis, we were private. And it's funny, but I'm not really a good self-promoter. And so I said, well, how do I do this? But I realized, though, that I'm a really good promoter of other people and of good topics and concepts, and that I'm a good tour guide. So I may not be good at hyping myself up, but I can definitely point at the highlights of things that I thought were beautiful. And what I did is I spent the last basically 11 years going on this run of trying to promote craft cannabis, craft regions, so that my region, Humboldt County, would be able to have that value move forward from the past into the future. Because I had toured a lot of major facilities that did agricultural production, primarily flower houses. And once I started seeing companies that were spitting out 2 or 3 million bulbs a day, I knew that when cannabis went mainstream, that was going to be our future. And I knew that didn't fit really any of us because we didn't have the infrastructure to do that. And that wasn't really our background. Most of us desired to run our farms and live a little bit more what I would call like an organic life. And so I figured that if I could get Humboldt County to shine, then it would shine on all of us. And people thought I was nuts at first because I'm not even from Humboldt County. And the thing was that I wanted to live here my whole life. I want to die here. If I could be buried in the Humboldt soil and decompose and be part of the microbial chain in Humboldt, my life was complete. And the only way to do that is to make it so that there's actually a future here. And I realized that if I just tried hard to always lift the region up and talk about the good and highlight the people that I thought were awesome, then it would most definitely bring a bigger picture. And when you're only talking about yourself, people get sick of you. And I noticed that. And so you have to make sure that you have to be self-depreciating. You have to make sure that you admit, you're flawed, because otherwise people don't take you seriously. You're almost Superman. And that's not true. We're all just regular men and women. And we just had some irregular circumstances and we had some supernatural experiences. And I try to bring that forward too, so that the mainstream can realize that, we were people who were bold and got to live this incredible life. And it allows the mainstream to be able to see us in a non-aggressive manner. And they realize, wow, you were just forward thinking. And that your desire was our desire to have adequate income so you could have adequate time to live the life with your family and your friends and yourself so you could really find a grounding. And I just drove that message hard for for over a decade now. And it worked. It really started pushing an awareness, and it allowed me to get access into the state when they started putting together the regulation packages and all the information, and it let us fight for the appellation. So Humboldt has an ability to have its own distinctive brand. It allows other parts of the state to have it too. So you have other regions that are known for cannabis cultivation. They're not excluded. They have the ability also. It starts to legitimize craft cultivators, because people would deal with me and they'd realize, whoa, you have a successful operation, you got a successful store, you have all this stuff. You're not lacking competency in business. And I would always try to let the mainstream understand that if you weren't chasing us and trying to put us in prison, you actually would have known us a little better. And so it started really changing that paradigm, that model that cultivators were somehow inferior, and that we were out of control, dope growers that were destroying the environment. And it really made a huge difference. And I'm grateful, because it allows me to work with a tremendous number of people, basically highlighting all the beauty of cannabis to me. So the Breeder Series is a good example where I got to, and I paid for all that stuff. So it was no charge to anybody that was in my shows. I covered all of it. I didn't pay it. No one had to pay for any of it. I paid for all of it. And it was because I wanted to see the people that I respect and work with highlighted. And I knew that if I was to showcase them and push them forward, it would help all of these people. And in return, we would all be under that umbrella. And I'm stoked, because it's actually working. And when we go to these regen events, the feedback is phenomenal for all of us, because all of us did this same mission, just in different degrees. And I was fortunate where I was able to get an incredible amount of media coverage, and I made sure I understood where I came from. I was always loyal to my roots, and it grounded me enough to where the media would allow me to speak, and then the people in the region would allow me to speak for them occasionally. And I'm just grateful for the honor to be considered, a citizen of the region.
Yeah, it was really wonderful to hear you talk about that, and how it allows you guys to give, especially politically. We have to fight really hard. You want to talk a little bit about that, because that's one of the biggest benefits to it.
Oh, totally. When I was talking to the growers in Maine, and when we go to Ann Arbor, Michigan, I'm going to give them the same message of understand what a lobbyist does. Because for all of us in cannabis, we were all living this life that was semi-private, and we didn't really understand that when it went legal, we were going to have to work together in a way we weren't aware of. And that was really to consolidate our monies and hire a lobbyist that we hired, who spoke for us. Because in California, a lobbying company that got paid about, $385,000 transformed the cap. So it went, it was going to be an acre max in California per individual. Well, they were able to tweak that and let them get as many medium-sized licenses as they could acquire. So all of a sudden you have single entities with, 300-400 acre operations combined. That's not the point. No normal 5,000 square foot, 2,000 square foot small farmer can play with people at that level. And that wasn't what cannabis was supposed to be in California. And we realize now that, for the $400,000 that it cost, if 1,000 of us had just spent $400, we all would have had that lobbyist, and they would have voiced our concerns instead of the Oakview group. And that's who bought the lobbyist, and that's where the predominant amount of change came from. And I try to explain to people that really it's your lobbying power that makes it real. As a citizen, you believe that when you vote and if you show up, you have some kind of influence. But you don't have the same influence as a lobbyist, where they can whisper in the politician's ear and explain to them the financial benefits. And I think that that's something that we were very naive with. And in hindsight, I sure wish we could have done something different, because now we're in a different situation. But with Maine is coming into this. And with a lot of the regions in California, they're coming into this. And they're the ones that I want to be able to see take this information that we learned about, in hindsight, what we should have done. Even though we did all this stuff that was intelligent, the one thing we really didn't realize was you better get a lobbyist who whispers in the ear of the governor. And if you don't have that person with the influence, you really are yelling outside the building. And if they shut the window, they can't even hear you. So I think that that's something that's crucial, that your local politicians, you have some influence on, but at a state level, there has to be a format to follow, and it's already been created. We just got to copy it. except that we're more ethical about what our desires are, which is inclusive, to cover the number of people in cannabis that really are here.
So on that note, when do you think? What is your prediction on when the feds are going to legalize?
That's a good question. I think a lot of it is to do with when it's convenient for them, which is basically how you're seeing it now. Just like hemp, you know, with hemp, they said, hey, we're going to legalize hemp, but it was because you got McConnell pushing it for his region, and they'll be, and I'm happy for the regions that got access to hemp, but most people that were doing hemp was a misnomer. They were really running cannabis under 0.03. And so hemp let them get a product that they could then distill out and turn into some form of edible, meaning a sublingual, a tincture, because that's the predominant amount of CBD consumption is through the oral methodology, not through smoke, not through surface, through topical. And so when they flipped it up and went, Schedule 7 on it, made it legal, the FDA was able to take it over. And all these people that ran all these tincture business, oral suspension businesses, they just got wiped right out. So now it opens up another door for the cannabis farmers that are under the cannabis regulations, because now they can grow that CBD product, which is what we're going to call CBD product, non-hemp. And now you can enter the market with that, but at a radically different cost of production because of the costs. So when the powerful senators wanted hemp to be produced in their regions to offset their lack of economy, it happens. They instantly take away the ability for the majority of people who used it to make money right out of existence. And now it's going to be something that John Deere is going to design tractors to work with. So, you're not even in the hemp business in a minute.
Yeah, and Marlboro and everybody's going to take over in the southeast. Tobacco is going to take.
Yeah, they're going to call it no-bacco.
Yeah, and the other thing was that one thing, I don't know if you realize, because we had a guest on the show that's a friend of ours over here, because I'm on the East Coast and he's in the Southeast, and he's in the Southeast, and he's got a successful hemp farm. And what we learned from that was some of the states here were treating it as an agricultural commodity instead of a medicine, which is different than what was on the West Coast. Did you realize that, Kevin? Yeah,
it is.
I figured
that's the point, is that they changed it, and they need to, and I'm not against it, because the thing is, when you get caught up in a situation, you become very centric to your plight. And so all of a sudden we're like, hey, we're losing our ability to cultivate cannabis. But if you look at the American farmers, if they're not completely subsidized, in order to get a subsidy, you got to use the GMO seed package, you got to use the chemical ferts, and you got to use the chemical insecticide package, all bundled, or you don't get paid. If you don't do that, right now, corn, you're losing $180 an acre. So if you're a corn farmer and you're not on a subsidy package, you're losing $180 an acre. And to me, the collapse of the American farming industry is mind-bending, that we've let it get this far. And so I realize that the farmers need an agricultural commodity too. And to me, that would be fiber, that would be omegas,
right?
And they would be able to use those products as a substitute for cotton and for wood, and then also as an incredible oil product for health.
Right.
But
yeah.
I'm always preaching. When we get into what we call medicine, when we get into what we call medicine, which is, something for the, well-being of the individual, that goes back under the regulatory system of cannabis, because then it allows an incredible amount of taxes to be derived. So I'm sure these guys all sat down and said, how do we make the most money off this possible? And it's to take this product and put it into the hands of these bigger companies, and then take away the one part that let you actually make decent money, which is the medicinal end of it. And now you have a huge shortage of these products because they're pulling them off all the shelves. And so someone said, what do you mean it's hard to get CBD? It's everywhere. And I'm like, well, the FDA is on a purge right now, and they're pulling this stuff off the shelves left and right. And the FDA is not the DEA. They're more powerful, really. They got an ability to do more broad spectrum stuff. They can come in, pull the stuff off the shelf. You're done.
We're getting mail order marketing over here in the Southeast all the time. Even my estranged wife is getting CBD oil through the mail sent here. It has been legalized here in the state because of what happened, but still, we're up to 20 farms this year. They're going to let us have 100 farms next year, and then the year after that, it's going to be open. So basically, it's like we're going to let the 20 corporations have a farm, and then we're going to let 100 guys try to make a farm, and then everybody else can try. But she's been, like you were saying, but she's been buying this, like, where you're saying they're purging. It's starting. I'm in a place that's not, cannabis is not legal, and I'm getting cards with cannabis leaves on them, going, saying, "Hey, you can get this and you can get that." And the mail's bringing it. The U.S. mail's bringing it to my mailbox, and then they're delivering CBD oil that from God knows where, because we don't speak. She doesn't really follow my advice anymore. But I just wanted to say that, being over here in relation to what you just mentioned.
Well, the thing is, like my mom comes down with cancer. And so she's trying to treat it with some Chinese hemp oil, and then nothing's happening to her, right? She's just having a terrible time. And she hits me up and lets me know that she has cancer and that she's self-treating. And I said, what the hell are you doing using industrial waste from China? And so I sent her medicine from Humboldt County that a friend of mine made.
CBD oil, you mean?
Yeah. And it worked unbelievably well, and she has no signs of cancer. So we were able to knock it out of her system over a 3-4 month period, which was mind bending. And my mom was never really a cannabis advocate. And now she's flying that flag over her house. And every morning she gets up and salutes it because she realized the power of the medicine is genuine.
My parents too. I got 86-year-old dad, 82-year-old mom, and they've been using some CBD oil. I've been getting them, and that's really nice product. And they've even looked into like maybe using coconut oil, both topically.
Mm-hmm.
And, well, mom's a little bit, dad was ex-military and he's like, 86-year-old ex-military. You don't see a lot of them going, what, tell me about this coconut oil.
No doubt. But it's a revolution because people at this point, they want quality of life. The issue with the hemp stuff too is that you got Marlboro. They have a company. I think it's called Apria, and that company gets into Kronos, which is a Canadian company. So they buy almost $2 billion into Kronos. So it gives them a Canadian company to start bringing money and business into the U.S. without fear of reprisal. They can raise money through public raises. Well, then they spend like 12 to 14 billion buying Juul. And Juul is that e-cig maker. They bought that cash. So they gave that company, literally, 12 to 14 billion. I can't remember the exact number, but in cash, not in stock.
Here we go.
So they bought the company. So now they can start to create the no-bacco market. And the thing about it is that I don't care, what they're doing. Anytime any of these companies make any products, when you take a look at it from a health point of view, it is always a travesty. And I think that that's the issue that America is slowly becoming aware of, is that the craft farmers, the craft food artisans, anybody that's working with the stuff directly has a radically different level of integrity with what they do. And when you start to separate the user from the farmer, there's always some kind of mischief that occurs in the middle. And I hope that because cannabis had been so useful for these years since 215, since 96, you have this incredible 215 revolution in California that transforms the United States in awareness. I just pray that these people that got the help are able to realize how they got it. And the fact was, it was people who were directly serving them. And there wasn't this entity in the middle that said, hey, I can dumb the product down and I can charge more for it, and I can reduce the effectiveness and I can charge more for it. And, that's my little fantasy, is that the public was exposed to this truth long enough to where they'll be able to start making better decisions, and they'll start to seek it. As long as our products are affordable with a reasonable range of price, so they're not so priced higher than commoditized products, then you have a chance to really still hold a market share. It's just that when you're in America right now, even though the economy is supposed to be singing, it's basically moaning, and people don't have disposable income like they used to. And so the price is really an issue. And people always want to talk about this upper scale market, and we're all going to go sell at the high level stores, and we're only going to be upper scale. And I'm like, the reality is the people that you're trying to sell to, there's 2 or 3 of them out of a couple 100,000. They don't buy a lot of weed. and they're not really the market that you want. You want the mainstream blue collar worker who uses cannabis as a health aid historically. And if we can just keep the education moving and have those people be able to get a chance to hear us speak in any fashion, then it starts to make them think, and it starts to let them realize that they believe their own truth of the stuff that I got from my buddy worked better than the stuff that I'm getting from these companies. And all of a sudden, they'll start to realize, hey, I might not be able to get it from my buddy anymore because of the regulations, but who's my buddy as a craft farmer? Where's the people who still have integrity with their production methodologies, and people who are willing to try to deliver a superior product over time? And I think that, because 96 was a long time ago, it gives us at least that opportunity. If there was never been medical marijuana and we went right into this legal situation, there would have been no chance to ever get anybody to educate. And we would just be demolished by these big companies because they would be doing full-on TV ads. They'd have every magazine. And we'd all look like a bunch of bitter shysters compared to the beautiful ad.
Oh,
But,
they still know we had the best moonshine.
Oh no,
guaranteed.
we've actually done 2 episodes from the castle, so.
No, the craft is craft, man, no matter what you do. When I was in New England, it made me really happy to be back because I got to see the New Englanders really applying New England craft to cannabis. And they had a love of the product that was unbelievable, and they had a love of the land, and it was just really nice. I saw that in Canada, the growers up in the Kootenays, the growers in Washington that came up, the growers in Humboldt, Mendocino, Trinity, all these craft farmers that just absolutely artisans. And it's humbling to be around them because they spent so much time doing the work to develop their farms and develop the methodologies. And what I want to see happen is that information get pushed publicly. Now, I'm not an advertising agency or a media agency. It's just that for whatever reason, the media allowed me to enter their world and run wild. And so I always laugh. I said, it's like when you open the door and a stray dog comes in the house and is running around the living room. You have to catch it before you throw it out. I'm that dog in the room running around. And at some point, they might catch me and throw me out. But until then, man, I'm gonna piss on every door, so that this way, I was there, and hopefully we bring some awareness to what we're trying to do. It's you're rolling the dice with this, but I think as a culture we can do it. We survived the drug war. We're all veterans of the drug war. And I'm a veteran of the military, but I'm a veteran of the drug war. And that means that you had to have a resiliency that was different. You had to have a passion to play this game because the punishment was real back in the day. And I believe that root makes us a different group of people, in the fact that we're willing to fight so hard, but we're kind and we're good people. We're not going to go hurt anybody to do it, but we're definitely going to try to figure it out.
And you did a bunch of work with veterans and CBD. Do you want to mention that? You actually developed some pretty gnarly CBD strains as well.
Yeah, I got lucky in that I got involved with CBD in its inception in the U.S. to where no one even knew what CBD was at that time. And a doctor and a couple guys approached me and wanted to do this testing because they believed that CBD had this impact on people's health. And at the time, I was running a facility, and so I had the ability to dictate canopy management. And I said, all right, if it's only 10, and the funny thing is, Steve, is that I didn't even believe that it was going to do that much, because it was so reaching in the hypothesis on how many things it was going to stimulate that I had a hard time believing it could do that much. But I said to the docs, I said, listen, if it only does 10% of what you're claiming, that would be a lifesaver for the 10% of the people that needed it. So I said, listen, I'll put the people on the job, and we'll do the canopy space, and we'll go forward. And so that was the beginning of the CBD revolution. At that time, there was really only Wade Lauder, Lawrence Ringo, and me messing around, pushing any kind of material. And then when Lawrence died, he and I were friends. When Lawrence dies, I get his whole collection because he knew I was going to push it into the mainstream. And what I did is I chose to take all this material and release it for free into the public. So over the next, series of years, I released probably 150,000 free plants. And then I created the largest juicing program in the country, where we were basically juicing 55-gallon barrels of green juice. And I was able to get on the radio and ask all the local organic farmers to bring me all their fan leaves and all the males. And the feedback was unbelievable, man. The community responded, and it was such a successful operation that I had all the elderly coming in to do all the juicing because everyone knew it was all free. We didn't charge anybody for any of it. There was no money made. I just used my successful rec business, or what we just call, the business, to subsidize it. And it was really because I tried to understand, how do you charge people that are dying and ill? And I realized that you have to interview them and make them prove to you their financial status. And I thought about it from my own perspective. And I said, if I'm dying and I'm struggling just to survive, the last thing I want to do is to have somebody crawling through my paperwork to say you're valid or you're not valid. And if you make a little bit too much, sorry, I can't subsidize it. And so I couldn't come up with a fair way that covered the spectrum. And so I just said free. And what I did was I made it so that we would provide no orders to any commercial farm. If you were a regular person, you could come in and get all the plants you needed. If it was for senior groups, if it was for the veterans groups, and we would provide all you needed for those groups, all you needed for the seniors. Anyone that could come in could get 6 at a time. They could come back 3 hours later, get 6 more. We let them cut them themselves right off the tray, so that it allowed them some sense of dignity, to where they didn't feel like they were beggars. And we really got to be part of something that was one of the most beautiful things I'd ever been involved in my life, which was community kindness. And CBD was this vehicle, and I was this person that was pushing it into the system. And so I became synonymous with the CBD movement because of it. But it wasn't because I was chasing anything that was trendy. It was that I was in an experiment, excuse me, where I saw the truth. And the doctors couldn't figure out how to monetize it, and they were going to hold it back. And because I had the access to the genetics, and because it was in my facility, I actually had the control. I just took it over.
And it didn't really cost you anything but a little bit of time and then goodness of your heart.
Exactly. And I think that anybody that's real cannabis would have done the same thing that I do. I in my heart believe that. I don't think that I was so unique in that respect. It's just that I had the tools and the opportunity. And I was really caught with the medical patients because I'd spent my whole life as a hustler. So I was career hustler, career cultivator. I wasn't used to being around the ill, except, I had some ill grandparents, but I wasn't around all these different people that was sick. So I didn't really understand how many people were suffering. And I didn't really understand how poor you get when you get sick. And I get into medical cannabis, and I was horrified because, to me, most people in medical cannabis were hiding behind, not all of them, and some of them were doing some beautiful work. But the majority of people I met in medical cannabis that were running operations, they were using that license under the guise of humanitarian work to go make usury money. So they were making excessive profits. And I'm not against excessive profits if it's fair business. But when you're taking a captive group that doesn't have any choice, and you're kicking the shit out of them because you can, I just can't get behind that. And so I realized that if I could do what I was doing and do this in a gracious way to where the people didn't feel in any way stigmatized or diminished, it would make all of us in cannabis look better. And that work resonated through the entire United States. And then the Stanley brothers end up knocking off the Cannatonic that we came up with at the facility, and they turned it into a successful business. And I hate to throw rocks at them, but the thing is
we've mentioned it before on the show, so go ahead.
It needs to be.
We haven't said.
Yeah, it's an interesting hot topic.
It needs to be cheap, man. If you're talking about people that are desperate and are dying, you're going to tell me that for $30 extra, that's what their life is worth? And I'm like, who are you to quantify the life of a human for $30? And if you're operating like that, I just don't have any respect for you at all. And I just can't do it. And I'm just like, look, man, be brave. If you want to get in the game, have some balls. If you're going to go do some scandalous shit, then just be straight up about it. But if you're going to pretend that you're doing humanitarian work and you're screwing over people that are desperate, that would eat sand to try to live, or even worse, go get the sand to feed to their kids or feed their wives or feed to their husbands because they're afraid they're going to lose a spouse or a child. Until you've been in that situation, man, you just really I didn't know what it was like. I just had never had so many people come to me and hold my shirt and beg for help. And I was like, I'm not qualified. I said, I'm going to do everything I can to help you, but they look at you like you're some kind of miracle worker. And so people take advantage of that. They take advantage of this incredible position where for one moment in your life, you could do something fantastic and transform a whole model of how we're perceived and what we do. And instead, what you do is you use that group of people, you shit on them and step on them and jump up for your own good, then proclaim yourself some kind of savior. That just doesn't work for me.
Well, and what was even crazier was they hired their own lawyers and were pushing for their strain to be the only one allowed in certain states. And that was even more criminal, you know, like they did that in Florida and a whole bunch of other states. You know, that was even worse.
Look at the shit going on in New York. You know, with you got some of these big companies pushing for no home grow under the guise that if you have any home growing, it'll be impossible to get rid of the black market. And really what it is you're forcing everybody to buy from the store, and you're not allowing people with a disadvantaged financial situation to be able to cultivate their own cannabis. And what people don't catch is that to be able to take care of yourself when you're ill is one of the bigger things of being ill, because you've been diminished and you don't feel powerful, and your state of mind is crucial. And if you can maintain that sense of self, it allows you to fight harder, and you might win. And many of the people that met me, I was honest. I was like, look, I'm not qualified to tell you I could help you or I can't. I said, what I can tell you is I will try, and we will do everything we can to assist you in this process. But I'm not a doctor. I don't claim to be one. And if we work together, it'll be all right. And that might have given them 5% more motivation because it was somebody being honest. Then they would say, is it okay if I come in and do my own juicing? Can I help people? Like, I have enough energy that I'd like to participate. And we realized, in new cannabis, you can't do that. They have to be employees to be in the building. But in old cannabis, I had squads of elderly and ill working all the time because they wanted to be there to help other people so they could feel valid too, because the illness had invalidated them. And so you learn all this dynamics of being ill and what it's like to fight for your life. And I was so healthy at the time. And I was almost like embarrassed to be that healthy because I'm surrounded by people struggling. And it was just so grounding. And whenever I see anybody trying to control that system of allowing individuals some kind of right and privilege to be human, so you can make an extra 20 cents and, for some of the product, $30, but by the time you're done, it's small monies. Is there something wrong with you? You a sociopath, straight up.
And in general, it goes without saying, but what you haven't, out of all the passionate things you said, you haven't mentioned the one thing. A lot of these people, especially older people, on limited income. So when you could give them a job like that, they were working and helping people, but they're being on limited income. And now you got this, and then the one company deal where they have to buy from the one company. And all right, I see Steve nodding, because where I'm going with this is what we've already found out on the West Coast is the companies for the states can't provide everybody. They keep running out of weed.
We couldn't pay you.
Huh?
We didn't. We weren't. It wasn't.
Well, you didn't pay them. Okay, I when I said it, I kind of figured they were volunteering too.
Yeah, they had to be volunteers, or we had to bring them as employees.
Right, but they're unlimited. They're all unlimited incomes anyway. So when you blackmail them into going into this one spot to buy an overpriced product when they could be getting it for much less, you're making them make a choice between medicine or food.
Oh, completely.
Or paying the electric bill.
We watched it in real life, and now we can talk about it because we're not doing it. But I used to supply juice to all these juicing bars all over the area, because in Humboldt we had all these people that were really about the community, and I would bring the juice over to them, and they would put it under the counter, and it allowed the people that were ill to be able to go into those places and tell the owner, and the owner would make them a smoothie and throw the cannabis juice in there for them and not charge them for any of that. And so we were distributing this stuff everywhere. And it was some of the most beautiful stuff I think it was the most humanizing experience I had in my life. And it was almost like, every day I was involved in this, was a step forward into being a better human. And when I got ill about a year ago, I thought I was going to die in the hospital. As I was going into the surgery, you know, I asked myself, did I live a good life? And I realized I had this beautiful life with my kids and my girl and my friends. But I realized I had been involved in something that was greater than me. And it was such a beautiful feeling to say that in your life, you got to do something that was really kind. And I don't think a lot of us get the opportunity because life is brutal. But I was able to, and it was comforting in a way that let me say, listen, if I die on the table, I don't even give a shit. I did everything I could do. Yeah, I mean, I was okay with it. And it was really because of that. I had done something that made me feel human.
That's awesome. I've heard you were really interesting and extremely knowledgeable and stuff, but I think you're my new hero, man. I tell you what.
Oh man, thank you.
I tell you what, just the way
heroes,
that
though, you know, we're all trying.
Yeah, well, I think that's what we're all doing here. That's part of what I love about being on this show, is everybody here really wants the right thing done, and if given the opportunity and the financial backing, we would give it to everybody. You know, we don't. It's not. I mean, it'd be nice to have a big business that is a successful business that would allow you to give things away, you know. But you know, and we were talking about this before because you know we get a lot of complaints about people. You know, everybody wants to make a company and make the big bucks, you know, from the cannabis industry. But we know we're going to be fighting. Hey, they're legalizing so they can regulate. We're finding that out real quick. You know, all of a sudden, this dream of being legal is now turning into a regulation nightmare for everybody. And in some of these states out west, every time they vote in somebody else into office, the damn law changes or whatever. You know, like we've argued about that on the show. But go ahead, Steve. I know
Newsom calling in the National Guard on the growers, like it's insane.
Yeah. Hey, they're just trying to feed their family, you know, going.
Well, it has nothing to do with the growers, though. That little debacle is because you have more distributors than you do storefronts. So how can you possibly have enough movement of? There's more people trying to get than people who are going to buy it. It won't work. And so they have $1 billion tax revenue they desired. They only come out with under 400 million. So they're furious, but they can't admit ineptitude because that would be an admission. So what they have to do is say, it's those damn growers up north. We're going to send the National Guard because it's all this egregious violations and you should see this. And what they do is they show a couple of dirty farms and it stigmatizes all of us like we're all filthy. But the truth is, I try to tell people, you know, you go to any area and if you go to the garbage dump and all you film is the dump, is that the area? And it's not. It represents a small piece of an area. And
that's so just like that latest movie that's out there trending.
Murder Mountain.
Oh, well, I was gonna say that shall go unnamed, but yeah, we've been talking about that every week.
You got guys riding around.
That's the one story about you could watch it. That happened anywhere. Kentucky, any freaking where in the hills. If you're in the hills and you get into shady business, you may get murdered. You know, it has nothing to do. That was nothing to do with good cannabis farmers that are trying to do the right thing and be organic and live on the land and feed their family.
It's been a nickname for years up there, right? So I got buddies that had some gorgeous organic operations up in Murder Mountain. You guys were great farmers with clean, beautiful operations.
Yeah.
And so they make this docudrama, and they make everybody look like they're unscrewing the light bulbs out of the ceiling so they can smoke meth out of them. And straight up. And so, you know, you destroy the momentum we're making about we're trying to be legitimate and comply, and that we may not fit into the mainstream, but we're definitely not malignant. And so Murder Mountain creates this malignancy that they can then sensationalize. And then the public can say, well, you failed with your program. And then they can point to Murder Mountain and say, look at this problem. This is the problem. Then they can send the National Guard to go and do their thing. Not, how about we maybe open up the storefronts? How about we work on the regulatory process? How about let's smooth up the transition? They don't discuss any of that. And I've been watching this and been involved in it the whole time. And I'm looking at this and I'm like, oh, my buddy said it clearest. He said, Kev, now you know what it's like to be Native American because he's Polynesian. He has a shirt that he wears that says, Hawaiian by birth, American by force. And that's what we are now. And we realize that every time you turn around, the regs change. You're getting jammed into another corner. You're getting diminished. And now we're all realizing what it's like to deal with the bureaucracy if you're a minority. And it's unbelievable. And you realize the mainstream sucks that up. And they're like, oh, yeah, let's go send a couple hundred of the soldiers up the hills with the helicopters. And let's go tromp around in people's yards and make sure they're compliant. But, you're up the farm and you're not allowed to have your kids on the farm. But for all of us that have good sized pieces of land, we separated the farm from the land so that we're able to still use our property. So you got your kids up the property playing. You got your girl up there having lunch with you. The farm's the farm. You're not on the farm. And all of a sudden you got armed soldiers running around. I mean, what are you doing? You can't. You're using military law enforcement for domestic operations, which is, for one, wrong, and for two, there is no problem with this. The problem is how they structured it and how they're working with it. And so we're going to go take this beating. And people are tripping right now because they know that there's tons of money, way more money now for enforcement than there ever was under the camp era. And so the camp era really didn't have this level of funding. This is funding. We got $100 million we're going to pump into kicking you guys square in the rear end. And they're going to go and drive this level of persecution on the people who are doing their best to move forward legitimately. And I look at this and I'm like, wow. It's the most incredible civics lesson you could have. You're really learning about the political system in its truest form, inept. And that's my opinion, but
Hang in there, brother. I hear you. I feel your heart, man.
Mr. Green Jeans wanted to, actually had a question for you.
What you got?
Oh yeah. Hey Kevin, thanks a lot for appearing on the show. Everybody loves you. And I'm sorry if this is just, but I think a lot of people are curious. I've heard a method that you invented or were involved in with, which is about scrubbing clones or getting rid of viruses on clones. Method of cloning with non-viral does a thing that doesn't pick up. This is something you were connected with this. You invented a method like this, and I'm sorry to ask you such a silly
No,
technical
it's all good.
question,
It's all
but
good.
I think a lot of people are interested in the end.
What
Sorry,
you
go
got
ahead.
is you got right now. Dark Heart Nursery just came out and said that they've diagnosed what dudding is. That they know that there's this virus that they've identified. Well, they identified it through a guy named Rick Crum, and so Rick Crum is a virologist. And about 3.5 years ago, Rick Crum came to me with the virology team so Rick Crum's out of Humboldt, and there's a couple other professors from other parts of California. And they bring me a bunch of cultivars that have virus contamination. And they say, hey, we have these plants, but we don't know what to call the virus. But we know it's a virus, and we can tell when we do a cross-section, we can see these like calcium crystals in the xylem and the phloem obstructing sugar and water flow. And we don't know what to do with it. And we're just curious from a grower's perspective, what do you do? And so I was fascinated, and I was having all these discussions for a while with this guy named Alan Atkinson. And Alan Atkinson was a huge push of probiotic gardening and anaerobic bacteria. And so I had done a bunch of light research years ago with the development of LED lights in America. So I was the guy that did a lot of the LED research with the light companies because I could use my facilities. So I knew that light was information and not just energy. So I was taking plants for a while and always running them outside. So all the indoor ops, the guys would give me varietals and I'd put them outside in an organic bottom end in a greenhouse and get them to be where they kind of restored their vitality. And I give them back to the indoor guys so they had source material. So I kind of theorized that if we took the plant that was damaged and we put it into an anaerobic system that had biomimicry, that really replicated this natural phenomenon, the plant would figure out what to do because it can't move in nature. So it has to have some kind of system that allows it to function. So Crum gave me the plants that were damaged, and I stuck them. I took them to another location that was at my other spot. and I put them into these earth box systems. And the earth box was just regular media. I was using stuff simple like Malibu compost as a top, laying it with some Grokashi so that I had my psyllium mat, and I was driving this anaerobic function. And I let them sit outside in the greenhouse. And they sat dormant. They didn't even move. And after about a month, I started watching the stems break. And I started seeing new cambial material run up like green lines all through the stems. And I started to watch the plant shed off all its old leaf and new meristematic tissue coming out of the apicals. And I took the clones from those apicals and I put those into an organic bottom end. But if I stressed it, meaning I gave it too much light too quick or any kind of situation, the plant would go right back to its old state. But if I treated it like a child and I allowed it to gently grow up into mid-age, those things were bulletproof. And when Rick went and re-identified it, he said, Kev, he goes, we know the virus is present, but it is not causing any issues whatsoever with production. So without using meristematic tissue culture to scrub, which is like anywhere between 6 to 10 grand, I was able to do it with an earth box. And I started getting material from people all over the place. I started getting all this old material out of the hills that was from the early 80s that people were losing to this problem. And they'd give it to me. I would get it to return. I'd chop the material, get it into a normal plant form, and then I'd give it back to them. And we were calling it ghetto microprop because it was just so simple and cheap. And I'm a blue collar guy. So I said, hey, let's figure this out. And now we can do it with the meristematic scrub, where we're actually using hormones in the solution to outgrow the pathogen, and we can take the material. But the problem was Crum and I had this discussion about me trying to figure it out with this simple method, because I wanted farmers not to have to spend 10 grand to scrub a plant. And because I'm a grower by first choice, then a dealer, I'm always caught up with how do you as a cultivator survive when technology is so expensive to adopt. And that Earthbox methodology works so well that I just shared it with people all over the place saying, look, using anaerobic driven bacteria and using natural sunlight and letting the plant figure out how to stabilize and outcompete the problem. It's almost like with HIV virus now, if you can get the right cocktails in place, you can get it to a level where it shows up at such a low level, but there's zero detriment to the carrier. And that's what I realized with a lot of these viruses and plants is that our cultivation methodologies don't buffer them. And when you're running salt-based systems under HIDs, what you end up having is a plant that is completely devoid of its natural biological protection systems, and it makes it hyper prone to it. And then when people come out and say, hey, we're going to fix this for you and we're going to use modern science, which is great, at $10,000 a scrub, well, I mean, who can afford that? So I just wanted people to be able to realize that we had figured this out in this very simple system. And I always give credit to Eric Lancaster from EM1 because he was providing me with EM1 to use in the bottom end. I give credit to Alan Atkinson because he had turned me on to probiotic culture. You know, she had 11, 12 years ago. I get turned on to it for the first time. And into this whole competitive exclusion model. And so these people that I respect as smart guys that I think are really biologically driven from the heart were able to give me some kind of mental tool. And then when I get the virologist to come in and hand me the goodies, I can play. And we were able to knock that out. And so I tell people all the time, if you don't have the 10 grand to scrub it, you can put it into this. It'll allow you to keep clean your cultivar. It'll allow you then to be able to have material that you can work with. And then what you can do is you can make the money you need to do a complete scrub. But we got it to a level where the Girl Scout cookie clone that he brought me, the issue was the farm was running clone material, and out of 700-800 clones, only 3 would stick. And so he was able to then quantify when I returned the plants to that facility that they were back up to a 98-99% success rate on that clone in terms of clonability. So when you go from 3 out of 700 to 690 out of 700, now you're talking some success. And the product worked. You didn't have any decrease in terpene production. You didn't have any decrease in cannabinoid production. You didn't have any decrease in stems, wall thickness, to where you had a fragility to the plant. And it was just revolutionary in my mind to see this, because it started making me aware of how much the plant works with the natural biology and how little we really need to do if we can just understand how to get out of the way. You know, we're always trying to be so smart, but I don't think we know that much. The more we get out of the room and let the natural situation work, the better we look.
Absolutely. Yeah. Oh shoot, I forget what my I was gonna say something after that, but that's all right.
Amen.
Awesome. Good question, Doug. Good question.
I got one more question too about the skunk project, about the breeding project to find the true skunks.
I'm digging, man. I started collecting all these old skunks. So I started getting skunks out of the early 80s. And I started putting them together to do a salvage project so we could start returning. What I wanted to bring back varieties from my youth when we didn't look at lab numbers. And what we wanted was just beautiful quality cannabis. And it wasn't just skunk pea. It was all the range within the skunks, these aromatic, attractive, interesting, just killer highs that were really balanced. And so I start mining for the varietals. And I ended up, like I said, I got ill. I ended up getting ill, and I almost died in the hospital. And it knocked the shit out of me for a while, and I had to put the project on pause for a minute. Well, while I put the project on pause, everybody sees the project online, and I start getting hit up from people all over the world who are old skunk collectors because their dads had the varietals. And their dads, they would show the video to their dad, and their dad would say, look, I'm in my 80s. And I can't do this anymore, but I want you to get the seeds to this guy. And so I started getting all this material from all over the earth, from all these people who had stored this material, and they had it with Polaroids. They had the notes. They had the stories. I was talking to people on the phone from all over the earth about their experiences. And what they wanted to see the material reignited and re-released. And so what we started doing was we started working on getting the formulations in the in vitro so that we could start to crack all these old seeds because they're priceless. And so as we work these formulations out, this year I'll be able to actually do this project and start to get into this material and start to lay the pollen into all these old 80s and 81s up to 88. And I got a couple in the early 90s. So 90 back to, late 70s. From all these hot spots all over the world where, Ohio, New England, Europe, parts of Canada, all over California. And it was just such a beautiful thing because it was usually the kids getting a hold of me, and the kids were in their 40s. So they're younger than me. And they were like, hey, I saw this. I talked to my dad. And they were so happy that somebody was going to go and try to save some of these old varieties because it was an emotional connection to our youth when we used to smoke good pot and it was good. And when I was cutting one of the 81s up in the shop to clone it, it filled the whole building with this musky, sweet richness. And people couldn't believe it was coming off of a vegetative plant. The esters and the thiols were active. Those alcohols were so volatile. And none of the cannabis today is volatile like that. It does not have that same alcohol volatility. And we can't even capture it up until you spoke to me about what you were talking about, Steve, that you can't even capture it in an extraction process. So you lose all this beautiful stuff. And what I wanted to do was get some killer cannabis from the past so that people that were 50 and above could go back to the days when herb was just good herb and it made you feel good and you were happy when you smoked it. And if you got into some of the more aggressive stuff, man, it just straight up scorched you. But it was stuff that was completely pulled out of our system, and mostly because it smelled too strong. So we didn't have charcoal. I call it BC, before charcoal. And so the charcoal can was something that really made cultivation easy. And for most people, they didn't have the ability to run those varietals. And because they were going to get caught because it was so loud, they had to get rid of it. And so, the illegalities, the persecution let us get rid of some of the greatest gene pool material in our existence, which were these incredible varietals that were selected back when quality mattered, back when the cultivators were growing the best herb for how they perceived it as smoke. And now its best herb perceived as how it looks on Instagram, how its terp profile is, because it's big, its numbers, they're big. But the bottom line is, when you smoke it, does it change you for the better? Or are you just affected? And to me, a lot of those older varieties have been groomed by people who really loved cannabis, and their love of it drove them, and the market would accept it in differentiation. So it allowed them to sell it. But the people who grew it were about it. Those old farmers, man, they were about good grass. And now it's about making money selling good grass. And the money was second to the good grass because the money would follow the good grass. And that's what the Skunk Project is. It's me digging these up. And I've shared a bunch of these plants with people so that I'm not the only one holding them. And mostly I share them with people who really are just regular people who say, hey, I'd like to have an old nasty skunk to smoke. Can you hook me up?
Hey, I'd like to have an old nasty skunk. Could you hook me up?
You know I will. Because the main point is that that's cannabis. But for real, that's cannabis. Everybody, you know, I understand proprietary stuff, and there's things that I don't share that I was given by people who asked me, please don't put it into the market because it's too close to their source material. And so I never burn you on that one. But I like to share stuff that's really valuable to people who aren't in the commercial industry. And they're my favorite people. They're just people. Basically, if you're polite and you're like, hey, I just want to smoke some good old school weed, and I'm not trying to get caught up in this new crap. I just want some good herb for my head, and this is something I'd like to experience. That's my favorite group, because to me that brings me back to my roots of we were all loving weed enough that we would risk all this other crap. All the blowing up of the industry, and then all the blowing up that I did as I went forward, that's second to what drove me in the beginning. And the beginning was a love of good weed.
It used to make us mellow.
Yeah, and functional.
Sorry,
with a
Steve.
long high. It made you feel better and enhanced the picture.
Yeah.
And for people that are in the 50s to 70s, man, the number of people that hit me up saying, Kev, we would love to be able to experience these things again, because everything that's been put on the market now is too intense, too driven in a certain direction, and it doesn't allow them that sensation. And so you just got to go, same thing. You go through the skunk profiles and you take a look at these gradients of how we perceive it. Skunk's a family. It's unfortunate that the family gets shut off for the name and the smell, because there was way more than just skunk piss. And skunk piss was fun, but that stuff was some red eye high. And not everybody wants to be bleeding out the eye and on their hands and knees. And so I like that. But I loved all the other skunks too that were just these rich, aromatic, musky, funky, sexy flavors with a killer high. And we didn't care about the numbers. So it might only be 14%, but you didn't give a shit, because 14% in quality is 50%. The numbers don't
You were
matter.
mellow.
Yeah, the numbers tell you a thing, but
Sorry.
I mean, I get to smoke a lot of grass, and I see all the hot strains all the time, and I'm like, yeah, it's good, and I'm high, but man, I want it to be where it enhances my life, not just takes me out of the room. I want it to take me to another world, in a world I want to be in. My dog.
So yeah, I'm glad you brought that up, because there is kind of an extinction that's gone on in the industry, especially with stuff that takes real long. I know you and I both got those Reunion Island seeds, and they're supposed to be what, a 20+ weeker.
Yeah, the 24 weeks, and they even go on for 3 years in the Reunion Islands. Hey, hang on a second. Yep. Put them in this. Yep. I'm looking at some people that are grown in the reunions, and they're talking about 3-year perennial, where they harvest the plant, it goes right back into veg, they harvest it again, they go back into veg, they harvest it again, and you're talking a 3-year lifespan. That is crazy. I want to get into some of those strains that have no visual characteristics that you want to buy. They are completely non-productive financially, but they're the quality of cannabis you want spiritually. And if I can get some of that stuff into my hands, then I can then give it to other people that want those similar things. And what we end up having is these varietals in our world again. And cannabis is really only going to be held by individuals who love it. Anybody that's coming in as a major producer, they got a lock on that crap. Whatever they got is not leaving their facility. You are just getting the smoke. And so many people only get those choices. That's what I was explaining to someone the other day about what you see at the store. We had a question about a particular variety and its acceptance in the market. And they were saying that the analytics say that it was red hot. And so I was explaining to this major company, the reason why it's hot is because companies like you control the supply chain and you put that on the shelf. But if I had some other choices, people wouldn't buy it at all. And so it's not hot because it's real. It's hot because it's a skewed, screwed up market. And it was important for them to understand it because the analytics that you get back are a snapshot. The data is a snapshot. Data is dangerous if you don't know how to interpret it. And what I want to see happen is for people who really love cannabis to be able to be free of this corporate shit and to be able to cultivate what grows well for them. And if you want some cannabis that takes the top of your head square off and, you know, you basically are lifted up off your feet, then you should be able to access that. And you can't get any of that anymore because these companies say, listen, if it's not doing it in 65 days, we're not doing it. If it isn't over 24, we're not doing it. If it isn't 5 on the terps, we're not doing it. If it doesn't give me 0.85 per square foot, we're not doing it. Like, that's the criteria. And I think that for so many cannabis consumers, they're so limited by what they can get because these companies dictate your reality. It's almost like, you know, the commercial apple, commercial tomato. What you get at the store is something that fits in a lug. Not that it's good to eat or tastes good, but it fits in a lug. Oh, you're killing me. My daughter's over here in a kid. Pop, see the little window down there? There you go. She's a lion. So that's the truth of it. And for me, you know, of all the stuff that I've done and all these things we built and all the good stuff, as you go forward, what you want to be able to do is get some of these varietals that are lost to most people and get them back into circulation again. And that's what I saw with Tara from the Roberts Congo, where she had the Roberts Congo cut, and she was allowing people to access it because the guy that gave it to her said, listen, the only thing I ask is you share it so that we don't lose this incredible cerebral cannabis that's just so electric. And so his only advice was to share something that's unbelievably ripping. And so when I met her, I was like, man, you're such a good woman, because instead of trying to pirate this and hold it to yourself, you really are following the direction from the person that gave it to you. And you're going on a mission to put good cannabis in people's hands in a very nice manner where it's not you're handing a clone out once in a while, things that we can do legally. I can share with you a clone. I can give you 6. I could take the plant at my house and cut 6 plants and give them away. There's no illegalities. I could grow 6 plants in my yard, and if I was able to grow some of this fire herb, I could give somebody an ounce. No illegalities. And that's what I think we need to go back to as a cannabis community, is that we start, you know, I still do. I still grow my 6 outdoor, even though I got a farm, because the 6 outdoor that I grow, I don't have to metric. I don't got to put them on track and trace. And what I can do is when my friends come by to visit, I can send them home with an ounce of grass untrimmed. And then they get to smoke good outdoor. It's free because it only costs me a few bucks to grow it, really, in my time. And I get to go back to my roots of being cool. And, you know, you need the money to live, but I'm like, cannabis culture was so much more than that. And I don't think people realize that we were really nice to each other in a way that people aren't being cool today. And being able to share the genetics, preserve the genetics, it really came to me when I met a friend who was a coral cultivator. And he was an incredibly gifted coral cultivator. He had a huge coral operation at his house, and he had an entire room behind the tanks that was the filtration that he had custom built so that he could get a water quality that was unreal. And he was turning me on to coral frags as a business, where he was taking coral and then breaking it off and gluing it onto a piece of glass and putting it in tanks. And I said, people buy this? And he said, Kev, he goes, there's more varieties in private hold than there probably are in the ocean right now because of the acidification. He said, if we weren't holding these in our own tanks and preserving it, there would be almost nothing left to mine on the earth. And I realized that that's cannabis. Cannabis is being wiped out of all the indigenous regions and everything that's in the commercial market. If it doesn't fit a number and a production model and a cyclical time, it gets culled. And pretty soon all we're going to have is a bunch of commercial pot. And you're not calling it mids, but it is.
Well, so you're saying all the land race, they're wiping the land race.
Oh, they're gone. Most are polluted with Dutch genetics because the High Times and all that stuff, these fake magazines, they highlighted these competitions that were bought, and it allowed the public to be able to start to believe that the best pot in the world is this. And even though some of those early varieties out of the seed bank in the late 80s and the early 90s with some phenomenal strains, that shit got diluted quick. And next thing you know, you have all this infiltration of this lower end material all over the earth. And we have populations that have been in existence for hundreds and hundreds of years in these little localities that to me contain all the information for that multi-100-year period, which is really survivability. And we wiped it out. It's gone. Cocaine took out all the cannabis in South and Central Mexico.
Wow, I didn't realize that. Yeah, I didn't realize
that. Production buried Asia. And so with the drug war changed the reality of cannabis into a commoditized situation based off of how much material could you ship in a small container. And so if I could ship a key of Coke, it's way better than having to ship 300 pounds of herb. It's easier not to get caught. And then America changed in what they wanted. America became a different country after really the 80s when we relit the drug war up in full. When Reagan came in, he revved that shit up. And America went greedy, and America wanted more cocaine. Look at the opiate epidemic we got right now. And now, it's a cannabis renaissance. But the problem is, where's all the killer shit? And so it's held in all these little people's hands and all these private collectors. And on some of this stuff, I'm just trying to be able to, resurrect some of it, get it into a producible form so you can at least hold the gene pool. And then if you want to weave it and grow it into other stuff, that's cool. You do what you want. But at least it out over many people. And that way we don't lose these things that we've loved for so long.
Well, I'm glad you're rejuvenating skunk because that's my favorite. So that's really cool.
Yeah, I'm down too, man. I love it. I really like all the old Africans too. I like the herb that's scary. I tell people I smoked a Southeast Asian, like a Cambodian, when I was in the islands in the 80s. And I had to drive on the road for like 3.5 hours because I couldn't figure out how to make a right turn to get off the off ramp. And so I kept driving around for hours on Hawaii, right? I was driving around the island for hours until I came down because I was too high to figure out how to get off the highway. And I didn't even care. I was so high that driving was an adventure. And it was just this phenomenal thing. But it was there's the off ramp. And I would go down the freeway, and Hawaii's a loop. I was on Oahu at the time. And it was just such an experience. And I was laughing. I'm like, that's the stuff you need to have, is the far ends of what cannabis is. And then we need the true couch lock, the stuff that puts you to sleep so that when you've had a hard day and your body hurts and you're tired, you can smoke some of that and you're going to instantly relax. And you're able to use it in the way you want, which is as this beautiful relationship between you and the varietals. We have access to these things. We just have to be able to resort them. And then you could hold the skunk and I'll hold the African and our buddies hold the Indian and someone else holds the Pakistani, things that they love. And then you share them. You have seed sharing, you have clonal sharing. That culture has to develop as we go forward.
That's what was so great about the seed swap. I know I think half the people that were in attendance at the East Coast one, their heads exploded because they'd never been in an experience like that. And people out on the West Coast, that's not an uncommon thing between a group of growers or clubs or a different, conferences or cups. That's something that happens regularly, but it was really neat to bring that, to other parts and help be part of that preservation culture.
Oh, all day. There was a guy that came to our event in Humboldt from Texas, and Texas is highly regulated. So he comes to Humboldt County for the Regen event so that he can, experience cannabis culture. And he and I are sitting there, and all of a sudden everybody opened up briefcases full of seeds, and the Snow High rep, a really nice guy, I can't remember his first name, but really nice guy, he breaks out all these different killer varieties, and he hands the dude a couple packages of it, and the guy is looking at this and he said, in my whole life I've never seen this many seeds ever. And we're all laughing because we all have that many seeds in boxes at our house. And it was such a beautiful moment, because what you got is you got somebody that's able to go and bring that back to their world, where they can say, hey, we may not be able to do this in our situation, but when you leave and go to places where it's accepted, people behave like this. And I love seeing all the seed swaps that aren't cannabis seeds. They're the old heirloom vegetable growers, and any kind of seed. Preservation is crucial. Thank you. And it's just really about appreciation for nature, and trying to make sure that you're not damaging everything you're around while you're here, because that's really not your privilege. You should leave. That's why regenerative is a beautiful idea, because when
I
you
was going
leave,
to say
you leave
that.
more than you took.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I was going to say that. I was thinking the regeneration concept of doing all that's going to perfect for this, because you're talking about, like I always think about, there's a time the lights could go out at any time. If you don't know how to regenerate,
Straight up.
right? If you know regenerative natural farming, you'll probably be okay. If you don't,
Well, look at the seed storage. My best example is people say, "Oh, you don't need to store this."
yeah,
There's people that
I got
do
a
that for
shitload of
you.
seeds too. Yeah.
And I said, you see the Antarctic one? They spent, I don't know how much money they spent in Antarctica to build this massive seed facility, right? The world's foremost seed storage facility. I got pictures online of it leaking like a sieve, and the scientists running out of the building holding cardboard boxes with all the most priceless seeds in the earth, because the whole thing leaked. So my faith in the government holding things in safety for my benefit is less than maybe I would like it to be. But I just say, listen, better to hold it yourself. Collect,
But
share, store.
we might have. They were storing where we can't get to them, and in Icelandic type conditions, they weren't there for the general public.
No,
Anyway,
it was there for bigger companies to mine in the future.
yeah.
We're getting screwed. All we get is some CRISPR technology.
So that's why we collect billions of seeds.
Wonderful.
All the food. Steve just did a big. He just had a smorgasbord of seeds. He bought all kinds of stuff lately. But
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah. So, do you want to? Is there anything else? I don't want to take up your whole night, but is there anything else you wanted to mention before we wrap things up with you?
You know what I want? I'd like to say that I can't be any more proud to be part of my community, and the regenerative event that we've been part of. It touched me, because I got to meet the people that love cannabis in a way that most of the events I am involved with don't reflect to the same degree. I don't know if I've ever seen a population of attendees at anything that was so adamant about trying to rise together. And I think that people need to look into this and realize that if you're feeling alone and you feel like it's futile, it's not. That you're really, your culture isn't dead. And even though mainstream is kicking the shit out of us, it only forces us to tighten up our connections. And it's within that we actually have an ability to transcend and survive. And I never felt so good until I was in that Vancouver event, and I realized, wow, I'm seeing a beauty that's so genuine. And then we come to Humboldt and it just ripped. And then we go to Portland and it just ripped. And I know that Ann Arbor, Michigan's going to rip. And I'm like, we're going to be all right, because all of us that are really into cannabis, we all get around each other. What you have is some non-aggressive, non-persecutorial, open source lifestyle and sharing a good weed. And I think that people need to be aware that if you're feeling like you're being taken out of existence, realize that we're all suffering the same situation, but you definitely aren't being taken out of existence. You just need to shift, and you need to look around and realize that there's plenty of people just like you, and that the culture lives within us. It's not provided by anybody. We provide it. And if you got some good grass, share it with your friends, and make sure you smoke a little during the day.
Yeah, thanks so much for coming out and speaking at that and being part of it. I know you pretty much put together the Sundays, and it's been a huge, your experience and knowledge and the growers you've been able to pull to put together to speak on behalf of that has been, really amazing and wonderful. And I can't thank you enough for taking the time and being part of this. And I can't agree with you more. I know this year I was blown away by the difference in attitude that everyone had in Vancouver. And at first I thought maybe it was just because they're all Canadians, but then I realized, no, it actually is a sea change in the industry. And, and then even more so at Humboldt, going to Humboldt, even the difference between this year and last year was night and day, just because, now that everyone's kind of hurting and we've all kind of suffered for a year or two, everyone's kind of like, okay, we do need to work together to actually have a chance of staying alive through all this.
Totally. And the thing was, too, is for the first time now we're actually able to smoke commercial mids. We're forced to buy it from the stores because that's who's flooding the market with it. And all of a sudden, all the growers realize my pot's better. And it lets them realize that, hey, if we can figure out how to do this, we actually have a better product. And that's something that the customer needs to be aware of. So you have cultural solidity and you have a reality that, man, we're still growing good grass. And it's been an absolute privilege to get to meet you. I love listening to what you throw because you're a really eclectic dude. And I thank you so much for letting me be part of the podcast. It was great to be with all you guys. Stay in touch, man. I'm about it. I'm not going anywhere. I'm rolling till it's done.
Well, I appreciate it. And I really look forward to spending some more time with you up in Ann Arbor. And yeah, thanks again so much. I really cannot thank you enough for joining the show and taking the time and blessing us with your knowledge.
Thank you so much.
We were honored to have you. We were honored to have you, and I will see you in Ann Arbor, my friend.
Nice. We're gonna hang out.
Yeah, man, I can't wait.
Right
Yeah,
on,
man.
guys.
Old guys. Yeah.
Oh yeah, appreciate it, man. Thank you so much.
Yep. Great night.
Cheers. Take care. Say hi to your son for me too.
I will. And you get to meet my daughter.
That was cute. Did you see the little lion?
Yeah, little hand and stuff. Yeah, it was hysterical. She's making the dog wave to you. That was great, man. It's great. All right, guys. You have a great night.
Appreciate it. Thank
Good
you.
night.
All right. Well, and if you guys would like a chance to see Kevin and talk to him in person, you can hop on check out the Science of Regenerative Organic Cannabis Conference. You can check that out over at regenerativeorganiccannabis.com. He will be basically putting together all of Sunday. So he'll be speaking in the morning, and then he puts together a whole bunch of different panels with different growers. In the afternoon, I believe there's 2 or 3 different panels with different groups of breeders, and he kind of moderates, and it's a really wonderful experience. Be sure to check that out. And if you can't make it in person in Ann Arbor, you can get a live stream ticket at regenerativeorganiccannabis.com, and I will be hosting the live stream except for during my talk. And we'll have guest speakers will be popping in, talking on camera into the live stream, as well as the class will be live streamed. You'll be able to have interactivity and ask questions. So if you want to ask him a question during a seminar, I'll be able to raise my hand and ask him on your behalf. It'll be a really cool experience. So if you aren't able to physically make it, or it's a little bit expensive for you to do it that way, you can get a live stream ticket as well through the website. So be sure to check that out. We have Dr. Lane Ingham will be speaking, Kevin will be speaking, I'll be speaking, Susan Wainwright Evans will be speaking, Chris Trump, Chip Osborne, Leighton Morrison, Josh Rutherford from Dutch Blooms. Really is a wonderful group. What's that?
Another Joshua. What's the other Joshua?
Oh yes, Dragonfly Earth Medicine will be there. They will be back from Bali and will be there in the flesh. So that will be awesome as well. They are 2 of my favorite people in the whole wide world. So I really always good to see them, and it will be super kick-ass to have the whole crew back together again. It's been a really awesome episode. Kind of hard to follow up that, man. It's really crazy. So what have you been up to in the last week in your garden, Roger? Anything?
Oh no, just we're having this weird weather. We finally got a little cold and we've had a lot of rain, so it kind of has been squashing a lot of plans. I'm getting ready to throw down some potatoes. You know, I've been saving some potatoes that growing a bunch of real nice eyes and root. You know, starting that, and I'm looking forward to that this year. I've been trying it for a few years, but other than that, no, we're on a slow tip right there. I got um, I'm just trying to get the greenhouse, you know, and the plans. Well, I'm just planning on going to Ann Arbor right now. I got to play music last weekend, but that has nothing to do with the show. So um, I'm planning on going to Ann Arbor, and anything as far as my garden or greenhouse is pretty much somewhat on hold until I get back. I mean, I've got, I actually, I'm behind on starting my seeds, but now that I think about it, I got some time after the show tonight. I'm gonna start my pepper seeds and everything, you know, finally, and I'm gonna do some broad seeding this year. I think I want to try some old school. I'm gonna go out there and turn up a bunch of garden, try that, you know, the no till, try to do no till this year and try it out. Josh gave me an idea how to start out doing that, so I'm going to try to. It's a lot more work though. Damn, you know, because you basically have to go and shovel the whole damn garden upside down. But a couple times actually. But I'm going to do that, and then I'm just going to broad seed a bunch of beans, and I'm going to plant potatoes here and there. I don't know if I'm kind of, you know, there's so many different ways I've looked at growing potatoes. I don't know. I've had decent. I did some no dig grow beds. It's kind of an Australian concept, I think. Basically, you know, and it's a layered bed that you put in. You basically throw down cardboard. We've talked about that for some other method too. But you put cardboard down. Well, first you soak cardboard so it's soaking wet and just floppy, and then you put it on the ground, and then basically then it's a raised bed on top of that with several layers of different you know, basically you build a compost, you know, sand and compost.
That's more like lasagna layering than no-till.
Yeah.
No-till is more not touch. Well, maybe you'll amend it once in the beginning to get it to the right consistency, and then
What they did was they used year-old compost, and you know, and the people that I was following, they had compost. They had this big pile of compost that they had been working for a year, and they started out where they did. Well, they put that down, and they put in they put sand in there. They put some kind of indigenous plants, all right, but without the roots for this particular plant. And I can't remember what that was right offhand. But that's kind of like you said, yeah, it was kind of like they'd layer something, then they'd layer something else. And, you know, then they'd go, but in the end, they basically used a year-old compost. So it was all done and full of worms too, by the way, you know, and I tell you what, they grew the hell out of some potatoes. So I tried it, but I didn't have as much success because I didn't have as much of the idea of the stuff I could use for composting at the time. Now that we've been studying a lot more about the Korean natural farming and all that, I've got tons of ideas, you know, and I actually bought, there you go. Here's what I did for my garden today. I went down and found me one of those big old funnels like Chris and them use on the farm. In fact, I know what store they bought it from now, pretty much. And I got one of those big old funnels so that when you take your cheesecake off the top of the labs, you know, you got a way to funnel it through, and it keeps all the small particles out, so you just get nothing but the serum, you know. And so I got one of those today. And I bought some bottles for my own OHN. I bought 6 bottles for my OHN and I think that's what you need because there's 5 inputs to make OHN, but you use 2 Angelica, so I needed 6. So I bought the jars for that today. Now I just have to get a ride down into the area where they have Oriental, you know, food stores, so I can buy all the cool bags of roots and, you know, yeah. Oh, what was it? Was you wanted to replace? What was it? Licorice root you wanted to replace?
I had an idea on some changes to it, but yeah, I'm gonna make it first before I recommend it, I guess.
Okay, so what? So I'll just tell y'all since y'all are listening, we brought it up for those of you that really hadn't heard about this before, or hadn't watched Chris Trump's video, you have angelica root, licorice root, then you have cinnamon bark, then you have cinnamon. I mean, not cinnamon.
Garlic.
Ginger root, and garlic. And you use 2 parts angelica, 1 part licorice root, 1 part cinnamon, 1 part ginger, and 1 part garlic. And it's a rehydrating process that you use with a beer. And it takes about anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks. I figured it out.
Use vodka, not beer. Use vodka.
No, you start out rehydrating with the vodka with a low alcohol content. You start, the first step is you use a beer, like a low, like for yeast, I think, maybe. I don't know, whatever. But it is.
Check out Chris Trump's video, and then I know University of Hawaii has some good stuff on that as well.
Yeah, well, Chris Trump's video shows you using beer the first step. When you get the dried angelica root, you put it 1/10 of the jar, and then you fill the jar up 2/3 with beer. And that's the first week or so. And then after that, you drain the beer and you put the root and everything back in, and you fill it with vodka. And then you fill it with vodka, and then it's like several steps that take 6 to 12 weeks. I'm not sure I got kind of 6 weeks out of counting, like watching all the videos one night, but I might have had a buzz. And then Wendy or somebody said that one of the girls that's on the panel that go at the Regenerative conference the other day said it takes 3 months, but I didn't think it was 3 months. I think that's a little bit longer, because you got some steps that are 1 week and you got some steps that are 2 weeks, but there's only like 4 or 5 steps. So, that's, I think.
Well, I got some that's someone gave me, it's a year old, so that was pretty good at the last conference.
Yeah.
So somebody asked in chat if aquaponics is better, or what's different about aquaponic production. I thought I would screen share that real quick, at least the concept. So
cool.
We're gonna hit this real quick. So in aquaponics, we use a method called dual root zone. So this is just a diagram so you can understand it. But we have a soil layer up top, and then we have a hydrogen layer below inside of a pot. And then we have the water layer, so that's about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch from the soil layer. The burlap just functions to retain the soil and allow the roots to continue on. The water, what happens is when you put this in a flood and drain table, and the water, when it floods and drains, acts like a diaphragm, increasing gas exchange in both the lower half of the root zone and the upper half of the root zone. By growing them this way with the soil up top and the aquatics below, we can get the full benefit of the soil food web, fungi, mycorrhizae, amoebas, protozoa, microarthropods, nematodes, all those things, and the ability to supplement with mineral nutrients if we want to without affecting the fish water. And it gives you all of those benefits up there. And then in the bottom half, we have all the aquatic microbes and the aquatic food web, which is, very, very different and much more diverse, but on average 160+% more diverse than the terrestrial soil biome in terms of number of individual species. So when you combine that 160% additional species with all the ones that you guys are using in soil, what that does is it stimulates the plant's immune system significantly differently and much, much more. And when what that causes is that it causes increases in terpene production, because the plants increase terpenes to defend itself from fungal pathogens, from UV rays, from insect attack, from all manner of different issues. It's not the only reason that they produce terpenes, but it's the primary reason. So by giving them access to more plants or more microbes in the plant root system, it's exposed to more and gets more diverse and creates more diverse terpenes. And what are cannabinoids? Cannabinoids are a terpene plus a phenol. So by overstimulating the terpene production, you're increasing your cannabinoid production, and you're increasing your terpene production, and you're able to do it all at lower nutrient levels because you're relying on 2 completely separate biomes. This gives you the maximum input. Now, by putting it in a dual root zone and having the water go up and down in a diaphragm, this allows the plants to get even more accelerated growth rate because of the increased gas exchange, not only in that water layer, but also in that soil layer, which allows the plants to grow even faster and allows the microbes to replicate even faster. And this is what it looks like when you do a side-by-side. It's comical. Like it's comical. It's not even, so that was in a media bed. So these were in media beds, and these were in dual root zone pots. And it's just laughably different. So that's the big advantage. You get increased terpene levels, increased cannabinoid levels. You get increased growth rate on average, up to 20%, up to 15 to 20% increased yield, and up to double the growth rate in terms of veg growth rate. Now in flower times are pretty similar. Sometimes 5 days faster, sometimes 5 days longer. It just depends on the strain, depends on your nitrogen level, depends on a couple of other factors. But on average, the flowering time is pretty similar. The veg time, you can get a much bigger plant and veg for the same growth period. We've even gotten documented growth up to 6 inches of growth per day with 3 new nodes opening. I'll leave for work and come back and the plant's this much taller. It's stupid. It's just ridiculous how fast they grow, and with that kind of ideal gas exchange and ideal microbial diversity, it totally changes the way that the plant grows and can dramatically increase particularly terpene expression. And really up your terps. We have some almost comically high terpene levels we've gotten on some of the strains that we've run so far with it, and it's, I think, going to be the key to maximizing production and maximizing genetic potential of cannabis in the future. Yeah, I'd like to use burlap. You can use any root permeable cloth. The idea is just to keep that soil from going down so it doesn't start wicking water back up. But that's kind of the basis for growing in dual root zone aquaponics and kind of the advantages, and just a short little breakdown of that, if you've never been exposed to it.
Because the reason you don't want it to wick up too high is because you don't want the minerals that are in the soil root zone to leach into the fish and kill the fish.
Well, not so much that. I just want to have two different.
That's the point.
I want to be able to top water and address the moisture level in an upper zone, or feed it if I want to. The biggest thing is just to avoid yucca extract. Yucca extract will kill your fish at extremely low levels, so no saponin or yucca extract. Be sure you don't have that in your soil mixes, because if you overwater, then those fish are toast. Now, what you do is you water that soil layer to the point of saturation. You measure that water volume, you reduce it in half, and that's the amount that you use for supplementation. And that's kind of the basis for dual root zone aquaponics, and the basis for doing things organically. It allows you to do all your soil amendments, build your organic super soils, whatever your favorite method is already, adapt that to it, and you'll get even accelerated growth rate. Again, the fish will provide 70 to 90% of the plant nutrients via the fish waste, and allow you to have a lower overhead and increased revenue options. You can sell the fish, you can sell the fish waste, and then you're reducing overhead costs because you're not having to put anywhere near as much work into maintaining nutrient levels, and just relying on that organic soil layer, small little nutrient adjustments, and the fish waste. And it allows you to do things with very little inputs. You do have to have some inputs, but you're just doing minor balancing. You're not doing any kind of real dosing, except for adjusting pH, really. That's about it. And iron. So hope that gives you an answer to your question there. Alrighty, so I've been up to all kinds of stuff. I've been running around like a maniac at the Regenerative conferences and a couple of other stuff going on. Bunch of cool things in the works. We're going to be doing some really cool projects here, especially in April and May. We have some really cool stuff coming up. So we're going to be filming in some cool places, working on some cool projects. Trying to think lots of cool things coming. So you guys will be seeing that soon. And yeah, I think we'll go ahead and wrap the show up. I'm kind of tired, especially still recovering from traveling and everything. So big shout out to Kevin for taking the time. Oh, what does it say? So you don't want to run off from the soil. Yes, you want to try and reduce the runoff as much as you can into the fish
Well,
Yeah.
that's what I was trying to make a point of earlier, that you taught me that you don't. Well, here's the thing. Here's what I thought I was taught by these guys. You don't want to overwater the soil layer where it leaches into the bottom hydrogen layer and then gets to your fish, because some of the minerals can kill the fish. And you have to be real careful with your iron. But yeah, I think that was kind of follow up to what we were talking about, and I may or may not have said it exactly right, but that's what I was getting at. If the water leach, if what you put as a divider with where Steve uses burlap, if you put something that would leach water up more into the soil layer, it stands to reason it could go back down and leach into the hydroton, which would be dangerous for the fish. That's what I was trying to get at.
It just depends on what you're using. The biggest reason is just the 2 layers of control.
Yeah.
You can adjust them separately. That's the biggest advantage.
So you have to figure out the measurement for your depth and your amount of soil layer, so that you don't overwater it or over apply the solution that or ferment or amendment that you're applying. That's
Yeah.
right.
Well, most of your ferments are okay.
Yeah, because they lay. Yeah.
Mostly just for mineral newts that you got to worry about. That's all.
Cool. That's good clarification. So if you use a ferment, it's a little safer than it is if you're using a mineral to amend.
So someone asked the pumps right off the fish tank, the roots catch the fish shit. We actually, most of this, especially for commercial, the pumps are actually in the sumps, which is the lowest point, and the fish tanks overflow into a filtration system. We then capture the fish waste, remineralize it, and basically compost tea brew it. Would be an equivalent. It's a little more complicated than that, but not much more. And then we reintroduce it to the system. So that's how you get a lot more out of it. And how they're set up. It's not so much, you could do that on a small, a real small setup, just throw it right in the fish tank and circulate it through and just do flood and drain up there. You will have some, if you're highly stocked, you could have issues with fish waste damaging the roots, but otherwise you shouldn't have a problem. Alrighty, well, we'll wrap the show up. If you've never listened to the show before, please like and subscribe and do all the things. You can find us on all your local podcast apps, as well as the YouTube channel, Ponics. Every Tuesday and Thursday, we have a show with a different great guest. So if you enjoyed this content, go back and check it out. We have 126 previous episodes you can listen to, and we have a bunch of really awesome guests coming up in the future. I forget who's on Tuesday. Hold on. Oh yeah. We have Jesse from Green Source Gardens will be on Tuesday, so that'll be really cool. Did I get that right? Oh no, he's on Thursday. Actually, I don't know if we have a guest scheduled yet. I'll get the guest scheduled. I think tentatively, hopefully we can see if we can get Beth from Open Cannabis Project rescheduled to hopefully come on Tuesday, but I haven't asked her yet, so don't quote me on that. But we'll get somebody great on for Tuesday. Don't worry, I got a bunch of people on the Rolodex here that have been wanting to come on the show. And we'll also have, he's got the Pinkleberry. He's got some super dope Pinkleberry. He'll be on next Thursday. I got the date wrong on that one. And let's see. Yeah, so please check that out and support the show. Please check out regenerativeorganiccannabis.com. Again, March 22nd through 24th. If you're interested in getting your education on, you can get live stream tickets through the website, regenerativeorganiccannabis.com, or you can go to and come in person in Ann Arbor, Michigan. If you're nearby or you want to come out and ask us questions in person, you could do a lot worse than the group that we have there. So, yeah. And Roger, why don't you tell everybody how to find you?
You can find me at ilovegrowingmarijuana.com or Roger Latewood at Instagram.
And a big thank you to Kevin again for coming on the show.
Awesome.
You can find him at I think it's One Log House dispensary out in Humboldt if you're driving up that way, or he's on all different kinds of talks. I mean, you could listen to him for weeks probably with this awesome recorded content he's done. So go check that out, and I appreciate all of you guys for coming on the show. I think we hit a new record for listeners tonight. So thank you, listeners, and we will catch you guys on Tuesday at 6:30 p.m. Pacific. Cheers.
Good night, y'all.